we can ensure food security for all, we secure human dignity. That is what humanity is.
If we can ensure food security for all, we can ensure real opportunity. We can ensure justice. We can ensure stability, and we can ensure security in the highest sense of that word.
When we achieve food security for all, it will benefit not just business, but society at large.
We're going to unlock a vast resource of human innovation.
We'll have stronger and healthier nations. We'll also be able to uplift our economy, at the same time improve our household income.
What it will mean, particularly for the children, is a much better future, a future where their brains are developed so that they can benefit from education.
We would have a world with less hunger and be able to focus on other important things.
And the world would be a better place.
We would be doing something that would make our mark in agriculture and in history.
If we could provide food security for all, the world would be a much happier place.
If we could ensure food security for all.
For all.
For all.
For all.
Provide food security for the entire world.
Food security is just really a means to an end, and that end is for them to be able to have the confidence and the ability to be able to improve their lives and those around them.
We have two things left. I'm not saying we saved the best for last, but we have very good things for last. One is Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack, and then the sum up by Catherine Bertini, which she's one of the best people in doing that I've ever seen. Let me say it's kind of fun to be able to introduce a successor. At one point I said, I'm introduced Tom Vilsack, the second greatest Secretary of Agriculture in history. But I'm beginning to think he may have surpassed who I thought was the first best. This is a most interesting person. He's a global thinker. He understands these cross currents that impact people all over the world in conservation, in production agriculture, in feeding a hungry world. He listens, and at the same time, he's an advocate for production agriculture and an advocate for rural America and issues involving rural people around the world. He's also an advocate of nutrition. Some of you know that he's taken the lead on school meals and a whole litany of issues that in some circles there have been criticism of in terms of trying to improve the nutrition of our country and our young people. And there's no question in my mind that he's been a transformational leader on those issues. So without further ado, I introduce to you my friend, Secretary Tom Vilsack.
Well, Secretary Glickman, thank you very much. It's good to be back here. Got to get my notes here. With all of you today, I want to thank Secretary Glickman in particular for his continued leadership. He not only did a fabulous job as Secretary of Agriculture, but he has always been available to the department. And we have called upon Dan multiple times since I've been Secretary, most recently to chair our Foundation for Food and Agriculture, which is a private foundation that's going to complement the internal and external research efforts at USDA. He didn't hesitate. I know he's extraordinarily busy, but he is now the chair of that of the board that's running that foundation, and we think that they're going to do just fabulous work. He has just been a great friend and a great mentor. He has provided me a lot of direction in terms of how to run the department. So, Dan, I really do appreciate our friendship, and it is good to see Catherine again. It's we just keep doing this, don't we? Every year, and certainly am honored to be in her presence as a World Food Prize laureate. Everyone knows of her work in this space, and Dan and Catherine make a great team. I also want to acknowledge Paul Schickler, who's here from DuPont Pioneer. Paul, it's good to see you. Want to thank the efforts of I think of Paul's company every day because the founder of his company is on the wall in my office, a very large picture, and I'm sure that when Dan was talking about the best agricultural secretary, I'm sure he was talking about Henry Wallace. But Pioneer DuPont has done some fabulous work in the production agriculture area and has been quite willing to work with folks across the globe to expand agricultural productivity and production, and certainly that's a challenge for all of us to be concerned about as we deal with global food security challenges in the light of a changing climate and some of the challenges it presents. I want to thank the Council for the work and the report. The Council's a group of thought leaders that really does provide direction and inspiration for all of us, particularly those of us who are focused on global food security issues and nutrition. And I think this year's report in particular is one that a lot of folks are going to be paying a lot of attention to and trying to find ways in which the recommendations that have been made, the 4 key recommendations, can be followed through. Just looking at it today, it occurred to me that when the Council directs all of us to focus on strengthening policies to support nutrition-sensitive food systems, that in a sense that's what we're attempting to do with our Feed the Future legislation, to try to embody in legislation and authorization a process that will be institutionalized in terms of focusing on ag productivity and expanded market opportunities, increased investment in agriculture and research, employment opportunities, but combining that and coupling it with a commitment to nutrition, making sure that we also focus on child and maternal health as part of this process. And I'm hopeful that Congress will take a serious look at the Feed the Future legislation. The expanding research agenda for nutrition-sensitive food systems, I think, again, referencing the foundation that Dan's part of, there is an opportunity here, obviously, and we've also requested from Congress increased funding in the hopes that we will be able to do more. There is just simply not enough resource being invested in agricultural research and nutrition research. And we're trying to raise the awareness of the importance of research as we try to meet this significant challenge. Preparing the next generation of leaders in food and nutrition, that's an issue that we're confronting at every level, not just around the globe, but also here in the U.S. The President's very focused on our STEM efforts. I like to refer to it as STEAM. I like to put an A in there for agriculture. If I'm talking to an arts group, it's usually agriculture and arts. But there is a concerted effort to try to get the young people in this country interested in science and technology and engineering and math so that they in turn can couple and work with their counterparts internationally to meet these challenges. And one way we do that, of course, is through our Borlaug and Cochrane fellowships, where we allow our people and our researchers and our thinkers to work with the researchers and thinkers around the world to do a better job of expanding information and knowledge. And then finally, the notion of developing public-private partnerships to support this new nutrition-sensitive system is something we absolutely believe in. And we are constantly looking for partnership opportunities. I'm particularly proud in the context of partnerships of the fact that we have 258 public-private partnerships connected to our McGovern-Dole feeding program. And that has been an extraordinarily successful program that during the course of the time I've been Secretary has been able to help feed 26 million children and, as importantly, train 132,000 individuals in child health and nutrition. It's a great combination, and we are looking for ways to improve our work and better integrate what we do with what USAID does in the same space, because they are obviously interested in education and nutrition. So we have signed an MOU working collaboratively. We're going to try to leverage our resources to make them even more effective in the future. And as I thought about my remarks here today, I would be remiss if I didn't focus on an issue that doesn't often get discussed in the context of nutrition and global food security, and that's the issue of trade. The importance of trade being an integral part of expanding access to food. And we are, in this country, ready to engage in a very interesting and I think important conversation about the role that trade will play in our policies here in the U.S. Just today announced potentially an agreement in the Senate among leadership of the Finance Committee to take a look at a way in which this president can receive the same authority that presidents since Franklin Delano Roosevelt have had to promote trade agreements, creating a framework for trade negotiations, and then providing Congress the opportunity to do an up or down vote on a trade agreement. Extraordinarily important in light of what's taking place in negotiations in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a huge opportunity for us to have a high standards agreement to expand opportunity in our country and in the countries that we're negotiating with. So we're really looking forward to this. And I testified earlier today, and I was struck as I was reading a recent history of the period of 1941 to 1942, prior to the U.S.'s involvement in World War II, and Franklin Roosevelt's efforts with Winston Churchill to create a frame and a philosophy and a foundation for what the post-World War II world would look like and what America's role was in that post-World War II world. He was a visionary, and what struck me was in the Atlantic Charter that they ended up signing in August of 1941 is the prominent role that trade played in that vision. So what was true in 1941, I think, continues to be true, and I think as part of our conversation about food security, nutrition, whatever aspect of food you wish to talk about, trade plays an integral and important role. And I think we're going to see an interesting conversation about that next several months here in this town. The other thing I'd like to share with you before I take questions is the way in which we are attempting to share. And I use that word share because I think there are 3 or 4 different ways in which the U.S. government, and particularly the United States Department of Agriculture, is sharing, and that sharing does indeed make a difference. It occurs to me that so often we hear of those who are critical of government, who are willing to point out where government is falling short or where government needs to do more. And it occurs to me that we need to be perhaps educating folks about what government does well, what government is doing in terms of sharing. And in this space of food security, in this space of nutrition, whether it's domestic or global, I think there's a good story to tell about government's role and the sharing that we do. Our International Food Aid Program, for example, is a sharing of resources, of money, and of product, of food that we produce in this country. $2.2 billion worth over the last 6 years, helping 48 million people who are in difficult straits have access to food. That, to me, is an important aspect of government and an important aspect of sharing. Or our Food for Progress effort, which over the course of the last several years has impacted over 250,000 individuals in connection with USDA, where we've helped to train additional folks in terms of ag productivity and food security in other countries and allowing them to be more productive in their home countries. The ability to extend credit, part of a growing agricultural sector in any country has got to be farmers having access to credit, whether it's in Bangladesh or Haiti or Tanzania or other locations involved with Feed the Future. We've now been engaged in helping to expand credit opportunities. Just in last year, we made over $12.5 million available, $172 million total during the last year from the U.S. government to small microloans to producers all across the Feed the Future countries. And it has impacted not only the ability of those folks to be more productive, but it also has connected to new job opportunities in those countries, over 10,000 jobs. So there is a direct connection between the sharing of our resources and the results that we get. I mentioned McGovern-Dole, again, 26 million children benefiting from that program in just the last 6 years. It's not just money, and it's not just product that we share, it's also people. And I mentioned the Borlaug and Cochrane Fellowships. Over the last 6 years, over 3,500 of our brightest and best in nutrition and food safety, in conservation and biotechnology, and in other disciplines have been working with their counterparts in countries around the world to improve the knowledge base in those countries, to make sure that the ag policy and the regulatory policy and the marketing strategies make sense. So it's a sharing of resources, it's a sharing of money, it's a sharing of personnel, it's also a sharing of knowledge. We have been very aggressive in our effort to try to embrace a research and development component, not just in the U.S., but also around the world. We've worked with 77 countries recently to do a food security assessment so that each country that we deal with will know precisely where they are relative to food security. We've worked to encourage specifically in 10 countries in the Feed the Future initiative more understanding of their market opportunities in order to grow. We've shared our genomic research in wheat stem rust in order to try to combat that very difficult disease that can impact wheat being grown around the world. So we've shared our knowledge, we've shared our people, we've shared our resources, and now we're sharing our data. The Global Open Data effort that was launched by the USDA last year is part of an overall effort within this government to open up the vaults of information that we've accumulated over the course of many, many years, and allowing that information to be used by researchers all around the world in the hopes that they can help us deal with the challenges that we face in food security. And then that has been part and parcel of our Global Research Alliance and our Climate Smart Agricultural Alliance, also specifically designed to help equip folks around the world deal with the challenges of climate change, which are very significant. We have 7 climate hubs in the U.S. now doing research on the vulnerabilities of our crops and our forests. Sharing that research over time will also be important in terms of identifying technologies and techniques. So I say this just simply because I think it's important. This is an area, I believe, where the U.S. government, and specifically the United States Department of Agriculture, has been quite effective and has impacted millions of people and is reflective of what I believe is great about this country, its willingness to share, its openness to share. And I hope that over the course of time, as we take a look at the report that's issued today by the Council, that we will figure out ways in which we can amplify, follow through on the recommendations that have been made by the Council. I'm excited about this tie between nutrition and food security. It is certainly something we're dealing with here in the U.S. in a very serious way, and that's probably a topic of another speech for another time. But I can tell you we are very, very involved in this. And every single one of our nutrition programs, every single one of them, whether it's assistance or whether it's in the schools or whether it's in a child care setting, all of it has a nutrition bent to it and an improvement in the nutrition that we're making available to our youngsters. Our economic security depends on it, and our national security depends on it. And what's true in the U.S. is obviously true in other countries as well. So with that, let me stop by thanking you again for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to the questions that you all have, but I'm proud of the work that we're doing, and with your help, we'll continue to do even better work in the future. All right. So get the 10-minute sign. All right. Questions?
Hi there, my name's Kate Collins. I'm a grad student at MIT and Harvard. I have a question for you about the points you just made on the trade and agriculture side. I'm curious to hear, first of all, if you know whether or not the tentative deal reached today includes AGOA, and also what you see the future of trade, particularly with developing countries, and agriculture looking like.
Well, I think that there was an effort on the part of Chairman Hatch and Senator Wyden to be comprehensive and inclusive. What was discussed this morning was a package that included the Trade Promotion Authority as well as the Trade Adjustment Act resources for workers who are displaced or impacted negatively in this country by trade. There was mention of AGOA, and I think the intention is that when this is ultimately voted on by the Senate and House, that it will be a package deal, and it will address AGOA, it will address TAA, it will address TPA. In terms of developing countries and trade, what's interesting to me is that we've seen actually a market increase in the U.S. Activity with developing countries, and in fact, as a percentage, it's increased more quickly in the last several years than with developed countries. And I think we have just an extraordinary opportunity with the Trans-Pacific Partnership to take an important step. This agreement is important for a multitude of reasons. because for the first time we're going to institute in an agreement itself, as opposed to on the side or part of a side agreement or a letter, high standards in terms of labor, high standards in terms of the environment, high standards in terms of the enforcement of those provisions as part of a trade agreement. So it's a much more comprehensive trade pact. It's obviously, for agriculture in this country, it's obviously going to be beneficial because it's going to significantly reduce the tariffs. It's going to create more of a science-based system for determining when a sanitary and phytosanitary regulation makes sense and when it's consistent with science, which we deal with all the time. And I think over time, our history has suggested that we'll see increased trade opportunities as well for the countries on the other side of the negotiating table. That certainly was the case in NAFTA, where we saw significant increases in Mexico and Canada and the U.S. In fact, in the U.S., we've seen since NAFTA 145% increase in ag exports. And the key here is giving people a sense of what's possible and what can happen with a more advanced approach towards agriculture. And by advanced, I don't necessarily mean just biotech. I mean just basic agricultural efforts that have been around in this country for decades that aren't necessarily accepted practice in developing countries. And as we deal with this growing world population, as we deal with climate and its impact on agricultural production, I mean, there is no question, there's no question it's going to have an impact. There's no question that we globally need to be prepared for this, that we need to be taking steps right now to figure out how we're going to mitigate, how we're going to adapt to a changing climate so that we can meet these food needs. Everything from avoiding food waste to embracing science and essentially creating a much better acceptance in this country of science generally. Without being critical of folks or not intending to be critical, there is indeed a distrust of science on both sides of the political spectrum. On the one hand, you've got folks who have a hard time accepting the fact that climate is changing, when in fact we know the world's getting warmer and we know that's going to have impacts on agricultural production. It's going to increase intensity of weather patterns. It's going to increase pests and diseases that we're going to be dealing with. On the other hand, there are folks who have serious questions about genetically engineered crops. And there's also no question there that that technology can significantly increase productivity, reduce our reliance on pesticides and chemicals, and in the long run will be part of a strategy for feeding the global population. So there needs to be a concerted effort, in my view, for there to be a greater acceptance of science, and the folks in the middle who are working through this stuff need to be a bit more vocal about the importance of accepting science and using science to advance nutrition and food security. So the question right there.
Hi, my name is Angela Hansen, and I'm with Dahlberg Global Development Advisors. I'm also an Iowan, so it's my pleasure to pose this question. I missed your term as governor in Iowa, though, because I was living and working in sub-Saharan Africa. And earlier today, we heard about some success in Ethiopia through public-private partnerships and the ability of Ethiopia to rise in its assessment of food insecurity. I wanted to ask you what you saw as successful examples of private sector partnerships and what you thought the sort of regulatory environment required to stimulate those partnerships would be, and how we could accelerate that.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there are several different ways to have partnerships. I mentioned the partnerships with the McGovern-Dole feeding program. That's a public-private partnership that is basically making food available to youngsters in a school setting. So you get two bangs for the buck, if you will. You get a child fed a nutritious meal, and you also get that child potentially educated as an incentive for them to go to school, or as an incentive for their families to send them to school. And obviously that needs to continue, and we need to figure out creative ways to stretch those resources as best we can to buy as much as we can. I think there's also a need for us to rethink the way in which we do food aid generally, and we're having that conversation now in terms of food aid reform that's being proposed that again will allow us to get more food more quickly to more people. And to do it in a way that doesn't necessarily compromise or jeopardize the economic stability of American agriculture or the transportation system that's been providing food assistance for some time. That's one part of the public-private partnership. The one that I'm particularly excited about is the public-private partnership about research and science. And whether it's wheat stem rust or whether it's the East Coast fever or it's just understanding better the genomic makeup of crops so that you can make adjustments to allow you to continue to be productive in the face of changing circumstances, that you can continue to figure out ways in which you can create, for example, drought-resistant crops, drought-resistant maize, corn, that would allow countries where there is absolutely going to be less water to be able to continue to be able to provide as much as possible for their people. You know, there is this belief, I think, on the part of some that we should be fearful of sharing, that it will give folks in other countries a competitive edge. It will create a circumstance where our farmers and our agribusinesses will suffer. The reality, I think, is the opposite. I mean, if you've got raising middle classes because you've got a stronger agricultural economy in countries that frees up people to do many, many things in a country and improves the economy of that country, creates middle-class consumers, those middle-class consumers are going to want American products. It's going to facilitate our economy. So to the extent that you can get people to accept research, to accept the science, to accept new ways to do things, that encourages them to be more productive, we shouldn't be fearful of that. There's going to be plenty of opportunity. 9 billion people by the year 2050, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for our agriculture. And there is a tremendous challenge to grow the productivity in agriculture globally to a point where it's going to stretch all of us in this country and every country. So partnerships in which the private sector, the public sector, ensure that we're not duplicating or replicating research, that we learn from each other. That's why we've opened up the vaults. Our hope is that there is benefit to the private sector from that. That's not a specific direct partnership, it's more of an indirect partnership. And our hope is that by working with the Climate Smart Alliance, that we then partner with the private sector, the nonprofit sector, other countries, other governments, to basically share information so that we do the very level best of adjusting to this new reality. I think we're on the cusp of more success. And I would say, finally, there is that trading relationship. That is absolutely a relationship between a government and the private sector. You ask about the regulatory systems. We need more consistency and predictability in the regulatory systems. We cannot have countries making the decision unilaterally for no scientific reason that a particular technology that's been accepted all over the world is somehow no longer acceptable or not acceptable, or it's going to take for a long time for the country to accept it. It creates dysfunction in the market. It stifles innovation. And it's going to be important for us to continue to urge consistency in the regulatory process. That's why part of Feed the Future and part of what we do at USDA is encouraging people to look at their regulatory systems so that they can in turn assure the safety of whatever it is they're selling, that there is a standard level of acceptance in terms of what is safe, what is appropriate. So those are, I think, a number of examples of partnerships, and it takes different sizes and different forms and different shapes. But the key here is indeed collaborating and partnering, because frankly, we don't have enough resource in government to do it by ourselves, nor does the private sector, nor does the nonprofit sector. It really does require, I think, all of us working together, and we have limited resources, so we might as well use them in the most effective and efficient way possible. Mike's coming.
Thank you. I'm Cynthia Rosenzweig. I'm co-leader of AgMIP. We make multi-model projections of how climate change will affect global and regional agricultural production.
You're not going to tell these people it's not going to have an impact, are you?
No, not at all. No, I already told them earlier that it definitely would.
Good.
And so thank you and USDA supports AgMIP, and so we thank you for that. I wanted to go a little bit further on your comments about climate change and the negotiations that are happening in Paris at the end of this year. Do you see agriculture playing a strong role in the negotiations there and playing a role in the mitigation, or as sort of accepted as part of the, one of the main plank there in terms of mitigation, or do you really see what's happening more with Global Research Alliance and Climate Smart Agriculture, more on they're formal relationships, but they're not actually in the negotiated treaty?
So what are you doing on April 23rd? If you're at Michigan State, you'll have a more specific answer to your question. And because it's not April 23rd yet, I'm not going to go into great detail, but let me just say this. Number one, we have to obviously continue the alliance. We obviously have to continue the collaborative research efforts in all spheres: livestock, rice production, crop production. We have to have common methodologies so that there is actually a reasonable sharing of information. Having said that, I think the U.S. does have a responsibility. American agriculture is roughly 9% of emissions here in the country. Our forests are net sinks. We want to maintain that. Between agriculture and forestry, net sink. That's not necessarily the case in other parts of the world. We can take a leadership role. But that leadership role requires us to make specific direct commitments in terms of what we can do with government programs to make sure that our percentage doesn't go up as the rest of the economy improves, and to make sure that we maintain that good ratio between carbon sequestration and sinks the forests, and figure out creative ways in which agriculture can contribute to that. And I think the United States agriculture will step up to the plate. I think they will make specific recommendations and suggestions and commitments that we believe are doable and achievable and are real and are significant. And I think we can do that, again, to this notion of partnership, through partnership in which we use our programs creatively and effectively. The last thing I will say, because I know I'm out of time, is I think this is another opportunity for partnership, the notion of an ecosystem market, to the extent that we can verify, quantify, measure conservation benefits, carbon sequestration benefits. We then are in a position to market that activity and be able to bring resources to that activity, which in turn will enhance agriculture's contribution. So I would anticipate and expect American agriculture to be a leader. It will be specific, it will be real, and it'll be announced on the 23rd. Thank you all very much.